Long ago, on the wide and dusty plains of ancient Mesopotamia, people began to live in cities for the very first time. The air shimmered with heat, and the great rivers Tigris and Euphrates curved through the land like silver snakes. Here, in this cradle of civilization, the Sumerians built temples, markets, and homes of mud brick. But with the rise of busy cities came a brand new problem. How could anyone remember everything that was happening? Farmers brought baskets of grain to trade. Shepherds arrived with sheep and goats. Merchants sold jars of oil, fine cloth, and shining copper. Priests collected offerings for the gods, and kings demanded taxes for the temples. Every day, people were buying, selling, trading, and working, but no one could keep track of it all in their heads. At first, the Sumerians tried to remember by using small clay tokens. A round one might mean a jar of oil, a cone could stand for grain, and a little cube could mean a goat. They kept these tokens in baskets or sealed them in clay envelopes to record trades, but soon trade grew too complex. There were too many goats, too many jars, too many baskets. The tokens got mixed up, lost, or forgotten. And that's when someone had an incredible idea. What if they pressed the shapes of the tokens directly into soft clay? Instead of keeping the objects, they could keep the marks. It was faster, smarter, and more lasting. They didn't know it yet, but this was the first step toward writing. The Sumerians used reeds, cut into sharp points, as their pens. When they pressed these styluses into the clay, the marks came out shaped like little wedges. Wedge in Latin is cuneus, and that's why we call their script cuneiform. Each wedge stood for something: a number, an idea, a name. A cluster of wedges could mean a man, a sheep, a loaf of bread, or even a god. At first, the marks were simple pictures. A triangle might represent a fish, a curved line could mean water. But as cities grew and ideas became more complex, so did the symbols. Pictures turned into patterns, and patterns turned into words. Before long, the Sumerians had created the first written language in human history. Imagine the moment it happened. Somewhere in the flickering light of a clay lamp, a scribe sat cross-legged on the floor. He held a wet tablet on his knees and pressed his reed into it with care. Each mark was a thought captured forever, a record that could travel beyond memory. For the first time ever, ideas could outlive the person who made them. Scribes were respected, even feared a little, for their power. Not everyone could read or write, and learning cuneiform took years of training. Young students went to schools called tablet houses, where teachers drilled them from dawn to dusk. They copied long lists of words, animals, plants, jobs, cities. If they made a mistake, the teacher's reed stick would tap their fingers not too gently. But the hard work paid off. Once a student mastered cuneiform, they could work for temples, kings, or merchants. Scribes wrote down everything: laws, trades, prayers, and even jokes. They became the memory of civilization, turning speech into stone. Cuneiform wasn't written on paper or parchment. Instead, it was pressed into wet clay tablets that were left to dry in the sun or baked in a kiln. Some tablets were small enough to fit in a hand, while others were as big as a door tile. They lasted for thousands of years, far longer than ink on paper ever could. That's why archaeologists today can still read them. Thousands of years later, some tablets recorded simple transactions. 2 sheep traded for 1 jar of oil, 3 loaves of bread offered to the temple, others held poems and prayers to the gods. The most famous stories, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, were written in cuneiform on clay tablets that survived fire, flood, and time. In those wedge-shaped lines lies the first spark of literature. Each sign connected not just people, but generations. A king could leave orders for his army, a farmer could sign a trade deal. A scribe could record a myth to teach the next century. Words had become more than sound, they were power. The invention of writing changed everything. It allowed humans to pass knowledge across space and time. Laws could be enforced, taxes could be collected. Stories could be told again and again without being forgotten or changed. Human memory had leapt from the fragile brain to the solid clay. Cuneiform spread across Mesopotamia, from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon and Assyria. Each culture adapted it, twisting its shapes, refining its meanings, adding new signs. Soon, it was used to record songs, medicine, astronomy, even mathematics. A clay tablet might hold a recipe for bread or a map of the stars. Imagine standing in a bustling Sumerian city, the sound of scribes scratching reeds into clay all around you. The scent of wet earth mixes with the aroma of baked bread. Merchants shout prices, children run through alleys. And in a small corner of the temple, a young apprentice carefully presses wedges into a tablet, unaware that he's shaping the future of humanity. The first writers didn't just write for kings or gods, they wrote for all of us. Their tablets became the seeds of our libraries, our books, our stories, our world. Without cuneiform, we might never have learned to record dreams or keep promises beyond words. And yet, these first scribes never imagined how far their invention would go. From soft clay tablets came scrolls, from scrolls came books, and from books came the screens we read today. Every text message, every note, every story we write carries a whisper of their first wedges pressed into clay. Cuneiform may look strange, just rows of tiny marks, but each one is a footprint of thought. They remind us that even thousands of years ago, humans longed to remember, to share, to be understood. The first writers taught the world that ideas could live forever if given form. And that's exactly what they did with clay, a reed, and a spark of genius. The world had learned to speak not just with voices, but with symbols. And in that moment, humanity crossed a new threshold. From then on, no story, no law, no dream would ever truly fade away. The story of cuneiform didn't end with the Sumerians, it had only just begun. As centuries passed, new kingdoms rose and fell across Mesopotamia, and each one borrowed the clever idea of writing with wedges on clay. The Akkadians adopted it first, then the Babylonians, and later the mighty Assyrians. Every culture changed it a little, adding new signs, new words, and new ways to use it. Cuneiform became the language of empires. In the grand palaces of Babylon, scribes worked day and night. They recorded shipments of gold, grain, and gemstones. They wrote royal decrees in perfect lines, making sure not a single wedge went astray. A single wrong mark could change a meaning, like turning 10 goats into 100 goats. So scribes worked with quiet focus, their reeds clicking softly in the warm glow of oil lamps. Inside temples, priest scribes wrote hymns to the gods. They listed offerings of bread, honey, and incense for the great deities Enlil, Inanna, and Marduk. Each word was a prayer carved into clay. When the priests chanted, they read from tablets that had survived through generations. The same words that were once whispered in the dawn of civilization still echoed centuries later. In schools, young students continued to learn the art of cuneiform. They practiced writing their names, copying long lists of vocabulary from teachers' tablets. The lessons were strict and exhausting, but they created some of the most skilled thinkers of the ancient world. To be a scribe was to be part of an elite order, the guardians of knowledge. They weren't just writers, they were scientists, accountants, poets, and historians rolled into one. Some tablets were used for mathematics. They contained tables of numbers, early geometry, and even the first multiplication charts. Others were used to study the stars. Sumerian and Babylonian astronomers tracked the movements of planets and eclipses, all pressed into clay. They didn't know it yet, but these little tablets were the ancestors of science books. There were tablets for medicine too. Doctors wrote down recipes for healing salves, herbs, and strange spells to cure sickness. A line might read, mash garlic with honey, mix with oil, and apply to the wound. It sounds simple, but it was the first step toward recording medical knowledge. In a world without paper, clay was the memory of mankind. The Sumerians even wrote letters. Messengers carried baked tablets wrapped in clay envelopes. When someone received one, they cracked it open like a little egg to read the message inside. Some letters were official reports to kings or temple accounts. Others were surprisingly personal. My friend, why have you not written me back? Cuneiform also helped create laws that shape society. The most famous of all was the Code of Hammurabi, written by the Babylonian king around 1750 BCE. The tall stone stele still stands today, covered in hundreds of lines of cuneiform. It begins with Hammurabi's proud words, "I bring justice to the land, so the strong may not harm the weak." These laws dealt with everything: trade, marriage, theft, and even wages. For the first time, justice was written down for everyone to see, not just spoken and forgotten. Imagine a marketplace in Babylon. Vendors shout, customers haggle, and a scribe sits nearby to record every sale. 3 baskets of dates for 1 silver coin, he writes. Then he seals the tablet with a cylinder seal like a signature in clay. The seal leaves a tiny image, maybe a god holding lightning or a lion chasing a bull. Each seal was unique, marking who owned the tablet and what it meant. Over centuries, more than 500,000 cuneiform tablets were created. Some were stored in archives, stacked high in clay jars and shelves. When empires fell or cities burned, the clay tablets often survived because fire baked them harder instead of destroying them. That's why modern archaeologists can still read their words today, long after their writers turned to dust. When archaeologists first uncovered them in the 1800s, they were puzzled. What were these strange wedge marks? They looked like bird tracks or tiny arrows. For years, no one could read them until patient scholars began to decode the patterns. Finally, the voices of ancient Mesopotamia spoke again after being silent for 3,000 years. One of the most amazing discoveries was the library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria. It contained over 30,000 clay tablets filled with stories, prayers, science, and history. Among them was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known literary masterpiece. It told of kings and gods, friendship and loss, and a man's search for immortality. Through these tablets, the ancient world whispered to the modern one. Cuneiform changed not only how people recorded things, but how they thought. When you can write, you can plan, organize, and reflect. You can build upon old ideas, rather than starting fresh each time. Writing gave humans a way to build memory outside the mind. It allowed one generation's wisdom to guide the next. Even after cuneiform was replaced by alphabetic scripts, its spirit lived on. It inspired the writing of the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and later the Romans. Each alphabet was a descendant of those first wedge marks in clay. In a sense, every time we write a letter, we're continuing the story that began in Sumer. Today, the clay tablets of cuneiform sit in museums around the world. They are small, brown, and humble-looking, but they hold worlds within them. Each mark represents a person's thought, effort, and hope preserved across millennia. Through them, we can see how humanity learned to remember beyond the reach of speech. Cuneiform reminds us that civilization depends on communication. Without writing, there would be no history, no science, no poetry. Writing allows ideas to travel faster than people and last longer than empires. From clay tablets to printed books to digital screens, every new form of writing is another echo of that first invention. So next time you write your name, send a message, or post a story, think of those ancient scribes. They, too, pressed symbols to share their thoughts. They, too, dreamed of being remembered, and because they wrote, their dreams came true. The wedges they left behind still speak, even now, in a language older than memory. They tell us that the human desire to connect, to tell stories, to pass on ideas is timeless. And it all began thousands of years ago with a simple reed pressed into wet clay.